I was barely 5 minutes into settling at my new home when my neighbor erupted, shouting about how she was calling 911 over my illegal luxury vehicle. She jabbed her finger at my Rolls-Royce as though I had just parked a tank in the middle of suburbia. There I was, standing in my own driveway, watching in disbelief as she pulled out a ruler and began measuring the car like it was some kind of crime scene. Clipboard in hand, she strutted around with the air of someone who believed she had government-level authority. Without hesitation, she actually dialed 911 right in front of me, reporting my car as suspicious. What she didn't know and what would soon blow up in her fascia was exactly who those officers ultimately answered to. My name's Bill Thornfield. Just 3 weeks earlier, I had come back to my family's old cabin in Cedar Falls, Washington, after spending nearly 3 decades overseas serving my country. The cabin had been left untouched for years, and it showed: peeling paint, weeds tall enough to lose a dog in, broken steps, you name it. But the land and the house were mine, fair and square. After losing my wife Angela a year and a half ago, I needed a place of quiet, a refuge to work through my grief and figure out what to do with the rest of my life. What I didn't expect was to step straight into a battle with the local homeowners association. The cabin sat on 40 acres at the very end of a dead-end road, tucked far away from the main neighborhood. It seemed like the perfect place to be left alone, or so I thought. On only my second day, while I was wiring up a simple security system, old military habits die hard. A spotless white BMW barreled up my gravel driveway as if it owned the land. Out stepped a woman dressed in high-end clothes and heels completely unsuited for country dirt roads. She glanced at me sweaty, in work clothes and an old surplus jacket, and I could practically see her writing the story in her head. "This property has been abandoned for years," she announced loudly, pulling out her phone to record. "I'm Donna Blackwood, president of this ho. You need to leave immediately. Now, I've dealt with everyone from high-ranking diplomats to hostile insurgents, so reading people comes second nature." And Donna wasn't just territorial, she was afraid. Afraid of losing her grip, afraid of change, and, most of all, afraid of me. But bullies always make the same mistake. They assume everyone else is weaker. So, I kept my cool, continued working, and replied evenly, "Ma'am, this has been my family's property since 1985. I'm just fixing it up." I even offered to show her the deed, but she didn't care. Instead, she fired up a live stream, ranting about a suspicious man occupying abandoned land and declaring she was protecting the community. The dramatics would have been funny if they weren't so overblown. Still, something in her words caught my eye. She kept insisting this area had been under her control for 8 years. That choice of words didn't sound like a community leader, it sounded like someone who thought she owned the place. After about 10 minutes of posturing, Donna roared off in her BMW, gravel spraying behind her. I assumed that was the end of it. But 20 minutes later, sirens echoed up the mountain road. She had actually called the police, reporting me as some sort of trespassing vagrant. I couldn't help but admire her commitment to the delusion. When Sergeant Marcus Rivera stepped out of his cruiser, I recognized a professional right away. A sharp posture, steady eyes, a man who thinks before acting. He explained calmly that there'd been a complaint about trespassing, so I handed over my ID and proof of ownership without fuss. As he scanned the documents, his expression shifted to confusion, then recognition, and finally, something like respect. He glanced back toward his car, where Donna was still filming. Then he asked quietly, "Sierra Broken Bar, what was your rank in the service?" I could have brushed it off, but his tone told me he already knew. "Major General, 30 years, 3rd Infantry Division." The change in him was instant. He snapped to attention and gave a salute so crisp it would have made my drill sergeant proud. And if you could have seen Donna's face at that moment, you'd understand why I tell this story. Her live stream was still rolling, and her entire audience got to watch a cop salute the man she just accused of squatting. From what I later heard, the comment section exploded of people demanding to know who I was, why a police sergeant was saluting an old man in work clothes, and whether Donna had just made the mistake of her life. Spoiler, she had. Marcus wrapped things up professionally, explaining I was the rightful owner and no laws had been broken. But the look we exchanged said more. It was the kind of silent understanding that only comes from shared battlefields. Donna, meanwhile, sat in her car looking like her reality had just been shattered. She expected to win. Instead, she found herself exposed. But I knew better than to think this was finished. People like Donna don't quit when embarrassed, they double down. And after 30 years of dealing with tougher opponents than a power-hungry Hope president, I was almost curious to see her next move. 3 days later, while I was putting up motion sensor lights around the cabin, another high-end car crept up my driveway. This time it was a black Tesla. Out stepped a man in a $1,500 suit, sweating in the August heat and clutching a leather briefcase that probably cost more than some people's cars. He introduced himself as Timothy Walsh, attorney at law. I'll give Donna this much: when she decides to escalate, she doesn't waste time. This time, she sent in the cavalry in the form of Timothy Walsh, an attorney with slicked back hair, a sweat-soaked suit, and the kind of briefcase that screamed downtown Seattle. He launched right into his rehearsed speech, throwing around legal terms like confetti. According to him, I was illegally occupying land that fell under adverse possession laws, and his client Donna had been managing this area for close to a decade. Clearly, the man thought drowning me in jargon would intimidate me. What he didn't realize was that I'd spent 5 years overseas working with JAG teams on property disputes in occupied zones. I probably knew property law better than he expected. Still, instead of shutting him down right away, I let him rattle on, rope in hand, digging his own hole. Adverse possession laws, I repeated, nodding thoughtfully as if I'd just discovered the concept. Sounds serious. Meanwhile, the poor guy was trying to keep his balance in $1,000 shoes that were slowly sinking into soft mountain soil. He swatted at mosquitoes, his perfect city image unraveling by the second. I almost pitied him. Almost. He finally pulled out a stack of documents, puffing himself up. My client has maintained this property and paid taxes on the expanded community development for 8 years. Under Washington law, she has a valid claim to adverse possession. That's when I smiled, and not kindly, but the same way I used to smile at insurgents who thought they were cleverer than they really were. Well now, Mr. Walsh, I said, setting my tools aside and heading to my truck. That's interesting, because I've been paying taxes on this land since 1985. From behind my seat, I dragged out a binder so thick it could double as a doorstop. Inside was every tax record, survey, and legal paper collected over 40 years. I flipped it open for him. And just so you know, adverse possession only applies when the true owner abandons the property completely. I never abandoned anything. I was overseas serving my country. And under the Service Member Civil Relief Act, those claims don't apply. You should have seen his face when I started citing the statute numbers from memory. Mosquitoes were eating him alive. His Tesla was coating in dust, and suddenly, the man realized the supposed confused old veteran knew more law than he was prepared for. And I wasn't finished. Your client says she's been paying taxes on my land for 8 years? I asked, flipping through my binder. Well, county records show my taxes have been withdrawn directly from my pension account the entire time. So either she's paying on land she doesn't own, or a broken bar. I let the silence hang. His confidence collapsed faster than a tent in a windstorm. He shuffled through his papers, hoping something might save him, while I stood there like I just figured all this out on the spot. In reality, I'd been studying NHO regulations and property law for months before setting foot back here. Finally, he muttered, there appear to be broken bar, some discrepancies we'll need to review. Which is lawyer speak for. My client lied, and now I'm neck deep in trouble. Trying to leave with dignity, he headed for his Tesla, only to find the low-clearance car had high-centered itself on the rock. Watching him in a $1,500 suit wrestle with a stuck electric car while pretending he still had authority was, without question, the highlight of my month. I offered him some bug spray and a bottle of water while we waited for the tow truck. You know, Mr. Walsh, I said conversationally, most legal disputes come down to who did their homework. You might want to tell your client to double-check which property she's been claiming, because I have a feeling the discrepancies don't stop with mine. The way his eyes widened told me he finally grasped that this wasn't just about one old cabin. Donna had overplayed her hand, and now the entire home might be under scrutiny. When his car was finally hauled away, He handed me his business card with shaky fingers, mumbling something about staying in touch, but the look on his face said it all. He'd be advising Donna to abandon the legal angle because she'd just slammed into a brick wall made of 40 years of ironclad documentation. What Walsh didn't know was that property records were only the beginning. I'd been quietly tracking Donna's hoe for months before moving back, documenting everything. And now, the puzzle pieces were starting to fit. That evening, I called my son David in Seattle. We hadn't spoken in half a year, and the conversation carried the chill of years of distance between a father who was always gone and a son who grew up independent. Broken bar, what are you getting yourself into up there? He asked, concern creeping into his voice. After I explained, if you need legal help, I know someone who actually specializes in property disputes, and unlike whoever that guy was, hearing the genuine worry in his tone hit me harder than I expected. For the first time in a long while, I realized my son still cared. But what David didn't know and what Donna definitely couldn't imagine was that I already had all the legal firepower I needed, because the research I'd been doing wasn't just about my 40 acres, it was about every property tied to that hoe. And the things I'd uncovered were about to change everything. By the weekend, word of my run-in with the police had already spread through the veteran network like wildfire. I was in the middle of replacing the cabin's front steps when I heard the rumble of engines climbing my road. Not one or two, but a whole convoy. 6 pickup trucks rolled into my clearing, each flying American flags. Out stepped men I hadn't seen in years, brothers in arms from across 3 deployments. The first was Staff Sergeant Tommy Chen, looking almost the same as 15 years ago, except for a touch of gray at his temples. "Well, I'll be damned," he said with a grin, reaching out to shake my hand. "Major General Thornfield, doing his own repairs. Never thought I'd live to see the day you worked without ordering us around." The rest laughed, clapping me on the back, surrounding me like no time had passed at all. There's a kind of bond among veterans that never fades, as of the easy laughter, the ribbing, the shorthand that only comes from walking through fire together and surviving it. That's what filled the clearing as I shook hands and caught up with old comrades. But beneath the jokes and backslaps, we all knew this wasn't just a friendly reunion. These men had driven in from across the state because Marcus told them what happened with Donna. "Veterans look after their own." "So," said Master Sergeant Rodriguez, leaning against his truck with a knowing grin, "we hear you've got yourself a little hoe issue. Funny thing is, stories about that particular president have been floating around for a while. Word is, she's been giving military families hell." That made my jaw tighten. If there's one thing guaranteed to ignite my temper, it's civilians preying on military families who already carry more than their share of burdens. While the guys rigged up an impromptu cookout because put 6 veterans together and burgers and beer appear like clockwork, a frail, elderly woman walked hesitantly toward us from the neighboring property. She carried a thick manila folder clutched to her chest, her step slow but determined. "Excuse me," she said softly, her voice tinged with nerves. "Are you Mr. Thornfield?" "I'm Grace Chen, your neighbor. I heard about what happened with Mrs. Blackwood, and a broken bar. I think you should see these." I took the folder from her, and within moments, the gravity of what I was reading turned my irritation into cold fury. Grace had been documenting Donna's hoe for 3 years, and what she collected was staggering. Forged deeds for properties that clearly belonged to other people, financial records showing hoe fees funneled into personal accounts, threatening letters to elderly homeowners, pressuring them to sell below market value, email chains targeting military families, banking on the fact that deployment meant they couldn't fight back. As I read, the mood around the barbecue shifted. My brothers in arms leaned over my shoulder, their laughter fading, the air growing heavy. "Mrs. Chen," I asked carefully, "how long has this been happening?" Her answer made my stomach turn. 8 years, she whispered. "Since she took over after her husband died. It started with small things, petty complaints, decorations, lawn care, but then she began claiming abandoned properties, forcing sales, targeting families when the husband or wife was overseas. I wanted to fight back, but she threatened me." Broken Bar said she'd have me investigated for immigration fraud. "I've been a citizen for 40 years, but she knew it would ruin me." Before I could respond, Staff Sergeant Chena, no relation to Grace, Though the coincidence was about to prove useful, I pulled me aside. "Sir, you need to hear this. My cousin in Tacoma went through the exact same thing 2 years ago. Different Hope president, same tactics as stealing property, harassing military families, squeezing the elderly. The FBI ended up investigating. Turned out it was a whole network of hoes working together." Immediately, my mind flashed back to the polished legal documents Walsh had waved at me. They hadn't looked home media, they looked corporate, professional, coordinated. Grace's files were meticulous. Photographs, audio recordings, copies of fake documents, and clear trails of money being siphoned out of whole accounts. She'd been running a one-woman intelligence op, quietly building a case any federal investigator would salivate over. "Why didn't you take this to the police?" I asked her. Her face fell. "I tried. But she has friends in local government. Every time I complained, suddenly my taxes were audited, or my shop license needed review." She made it clear fighting her would cost me everything. As the evening settled and my old unit pitched tents around the cabin, it hit me. This wasn't just a feud with a petty neighbor. Donna was orchestrating something organized, calculated, and dangerous. She wasn't simply a tyrannical Hope president, she was running a criminal operation designed to bleed vulnerable people dry, with military families as prime targets. What nobody realized, and not Grace, not Walsh, not even Marcusa, was that I hadn't been sitting idle. Long before I came back to Cedar Falls, I had been quietly gathering intel of my own. Military intelligence habits never die. Before I set foot here, I'd already mapped out local power players, potential risks, and red flags. As I mulled it over, my phone buzzed. A text from David. "Dad, just saw news about a bunch of vets at your place. Everything okay?" For the first time in years, I smiled as I typed back, "Everything's better than okay," because this was no longer one old man against an hoe bully. Now, it was a mission, and I wasn't facing it alone. Grace told us she was organizing a neighborhood meeting the next day. And from the evidence in her folder, I had a feeling we'd be uncovering just how deep Donna's intimidation ran. But I also noticed something in Grace's demeanor when she mentioned the footage from her doorbell camera, specifically the timestamp scratched onto the back of a file. She went pale, almost frightened, and I had the distinct sense we'd stumbled onto something bigger than we realized. The next day, her living room filled with 12 firmly faces lined with exhaustion from years of silent suffering. Story after story spilled out: harassment, extortion, manipulation. But the real shock came when Marcus walked in, carrying a thick folder of his own and wearing the look of a man who knew things had just escalated from neighborhood politics to a federal case. "General," Marcus said gravely. A broken bar. Marcus sets a heavy folder down on Grace's coffee table and looks me square inches the eye. "General, what I'm about to share is technically part of an active investigation, but since you're one of the primary targets, you have a right to know." He opens the folder, and the contents spill out of financial statements, property transfers, surveillance photos. In an instant, it's clear this isn't just about Donna Blackwood anymore. 3 months ago, Marcus explains, the FBI began looking into a coordinated network of Ho presidents spread across 6 counties. All of them were using the same tactics of fraud, intimidation, and forged documents to swindle residents out of their homes. Donna, it turns out, isn't just a petty tyrant in Cedar Falls. She's a key player, what the Bureau calls a high-value target. The scope of the scheme is staggering. Donna has been working with Ho leaders in Tacoma, Spokane, Bellingham, and several other communities. Together, they've been targeting elderly homeowners, military families, and anyone vulnerable enough to push around. They forge paperwork, seize abandoned properties, and funnel them through a network of buyers who are almost certainly part of the racket. Over the past 8 years, they've stolen nearly $900,000 worth of property, stripping homes from at least 89 families across Washington state. Then Marcus pulls out an old set of records from 1967, and suddenly everything comes into focus. "General, did you realize your land was deliberately targeted because of a dispute that started nearly 60 years ago?" He shows me documents proving that Donna's father, Theodore Blackwood, once tried to purchase my family's property. My father refused. According to the FBI's findings, Donna has been waiting for a chance to reclaim it ever since she discovered I inherited it back in 1985. That's the moment I stopped playing along. For weeks, I've been pretending to be a bewildered retiree, but these people deserve to know the truth. I reach into my jacket and pull out my own folder thicker than Marcus's. Marcus, I say evenly, there's something everyone here should know. I didn't just wander into this by chance. I've been investigating Donna's network for half a year. Coming back to Cedar Falls was part of a federal operation designed to expose exactly what you're describing. The room falls silent. Faces freeze as the weight of my admission sinks in. I'm not just an old general living quietly in a cabin. For the past 6 months, I've been working with the FBI's white-collar crimes division, tasked with unraveling fraud networks across the Northwest. Donna was identified early as a critical link. The Bureau needed someone who could slip into her orbit without raising suspicion, and me returning to my family's property complete with a historic dispute was the perfect cover. She'd come after me, and in doing so, she'd reveal her methods. Grace looks at me, confused. But sir, if you're working with the FBI, why didn't you just have her arrested the moment she tried to claim your land? It's not that simple, I explain, spreading my own evidence across the table. Donna isn't the top of the chain, as she's middle management. The Bureau needs the entire structure exposed to the buyers, the forgers, the officials covering for them. Arresting her too soon would scatter the rest of them. That's when David walks in. His eyes sweep the room of the files. Marcus in uniform. Neighbors gather and then fix on me. Dad, he says carefully, what exactly is happening here? So I tell him. For 20 minutes, I explain everything that I've been undercover in my own hometown. That the supposed property dispute was bait to draw Donna into the open. That this is all part of a federal case against organized fraud. I can see the shift in his expression. For years, David carried resentment that I put duty ahead of family. But now, hearing how those same skills are being used to shield people like Grace, to protect military families stripped of their homes while loved ones serve overseas, I sense his perspective changing. Marcus fills in the rest of the FBI's operational plan, how my role was to document Donna's methods and force her to reveal her partners. None of us, however, expected her to escalate so aggressively or for neighbors like Grace to already have stockpiled such damning evidence. Then comes the detail that hits hardest. Marcus produces bank records showing Donna's network deliberately targeted properties belonging to deployed service members. They counted on the fact that soldiers overseas couldn't defend their homes. He looks at me with grim finality. General, this isn't just about your land or your family's history. They went after you because you're a veteran. For 8 years, this network has been preying on military families, stealing from the very people serving their country. And in that moment, everything sharpens. This battle isn't about one stubborn president anymore. It's about dismantling an entire machine that's been feeding on the people least able to fight back. Stopping Donna's criminal scheme isn't just about her anymore. For me, this fight is about safeguarding military families, men and women who put their lives on the line, only to return from deployment and discover their homes stolen right out from under them. That isn't just theft, it's an attack on the very foundation I spent 3 decades defending. By the time our meeting wrapped up, everyone understood the truth. Donna Blackwood wasn't just an overbearing president. She was a key player in a well-organized crime ring that had been systematically preying on vulnerable families for nearly 10 years. Tomorrow, the FBI would begin rounding them up. But there's one piece of this puzzle I've kept to myself, something Marcus uncovered but didn't grasp the full weight of. Grace's doorbell camera didn't just catch Donna at her doorstep in the dead of night, it also caught a second car parked down the road, engine running, lights off, waiting. The plates came back to someone who should never have been anywhere near Cedar Falls, someone whose involvement changes everything we thought we knew about this network. When I ran that plate through military intelligence databases, what I found proved this wasn't just about fraudulent property grabs. Donna's operation had ties stretching far beyond our small community. Which is why, once the FBI wrapped up their briefing that night, I quietly murmured into my phone, "Phase 2 complete." At dawn, I sat on my porch, coffee in hand, watching everything unfold. 3 black SUVs rolled up to Donna's estate, Marcus close behind in his patrol car, followed by Agent Angela Williams, the FBI's white-collar crime specialist I'd been coordinating with since day one. But this wasn't going to be a straightforward arrest. This was the beginning of the collapse of an 8-year empire that had thrived in plain sight. Agent Williams had warned me Donna would likely lash out once she realized the walls were closing in. She was right, though none of us were ready for just how unstable Donna had become. 3 nights before the raid, at 2 in the morning, Donna appeared at my cabin, not with paperwork or threats of legal action, but with a baseball bat and a complete mental breakdown. She'd pieced together the truth. I wasn't just a retired general. To her, I was the one man capable of dismantling her empire, and she'd come to erase me. The security cameras I'd set up caught every second of her ranting about how I'd ruined 8 years of her work, accusing me of being another military tyrant, vowing to make me disappear like the others. That last line caught the FBI's attention immediately, suggesting opponents to her network hadn't merely been threatened, they might have vanished. When she began smashing the windows of my cabin while screaming threats, it became clear she was far gone. Military training teaches you to stay calm under pressure, even when the pressure comes swinging a bat. I didn't fight back. I didn't even call for help. I quietly activated a secondary recording system, ensuring her meltdown was captured in crisp audio and video. Sometimes the best weapon isn't force, it's letting your enemy destroy themselves while you document the evidence. Grace heard the commotion and called the police. Within minutes, patrol cars lit up the forest clearing in flashing red and blue. Donna, still waving the bat and shouting about conspiracies, tried to flip the story, claiming I'd attacked her first. But with 6 cameras rolling, and half the neighborhood watching from their windows, her lies collapsed instantly. The most satisfying moment was when Agent Williams arrived, flashing her badge. For years, Donna had ruled Cedar Falls with intimidation and manipulation, but the federal government doesn't bend to hoe politics or small-town corruption. Watching her realize her power was gone, that her empire was crumbling, was a sight I won't forget. The raid uncovered more than I ever anticipated. Donna's mansion was a goldmine. Detailed files on properties across 6 communities, meticulous plans for targeting military families during deployments, and communication records linking her to a dozen other Hope presidents spanning 3 states. The true shock, however, came from documents tying their operation to corrupt local officials, people who'd fast-tracked property transfers, buried complaints, and looked the other way while families were stripped of everything. As Donna sat cuffed in the back of a federal transport, Agent Williams briefed me, "General, this wasn't just theft. This was a coordinated attack on military families' stability." The financial records were staggering, nearly $900,000 in stolen property, plus evidence of laundering through bogus home improvement projects and phantom construction contracts. But perhaps the most valuable evidence came not from the FBI raid, but from Grace herself. Her 3 years of meticulous documentation tied Donna's local crimes directly to the larger network, cementing the case. David arrived just in time to see Donna loaded into the van, her reign of terror finally at an end. I could see it sinking in for David, the realization that his father hadn't been hiding away in grief but orchestrating a months-long federal sting operation while pretending to be a broken retiree. "Dad," he said quietly, his eyes fixed on the FBI agents carrying boxes of evidence out of Donna's mansion, "when you said you needed somewhere quiet to heal a broken bar, this isn't what I pictured." There was pride in his voice, though, real pride, and for the first time in years, I knew he understood why duty and service had always mattered more to me than anything else. The impact on the community was immediate. Within hours of Donna's arrest, a dozen families came forward with new evidence, stories of harassment, financial manipulation, and attempts to force them from their homes. People who had been too afraid to speak suddenly felt safe enough to step into the light. Their accounts revealed a campaign of psychological warfare. Elderly homeowners pressured to sell at rock-bottom prices, military spouses threatened while their partners were deployed overseas. Anyone who dared complain found themselves buried in bogus compliance violations that could ultimately strip them of their property. But the most chilling discovery came from Donna's computer files. Her network wasn't simply stealing home mess, it was attempting something far bigger. They called it demographic restructuring. A systematic plan to drive out military families, the elderly, and anyone else they deemed undesirable, then repopulate the neighborhoods with people they could control. Agent Williams showed me internal communications of Donna and her co-conspirators exchanging strategies on how best to identify problem residents and force them to leave. Military families were targeted for their frequent relocations and deployments. Elderly residents, for their limited finances and inability to wage long legal battles. This wasn't petty crime anymore, it was organized conspiracy on a scale few of us had imagined. Over the next week, the arrests kept rolling in. Presidents, crooked officials, property buyers who knowingly participated in the scheme. One by one, the pillars of Donna's empire were pulled down. What began as my investigation into one corrupt president had unraveled a network that had stolen nearly $1 million worth of property and terrorized hundreds of families across the Pacific Northwest. Grace organized a dinner at the Veterans Hall to celebrate, seeing nearly 90 families of people who had lived in fear for years finally smiling, finally feeling safe in their own homes, was more rewarding than any military commendation I'd ever received. For once, the battlefield wasn't halfway around the world, it was right here. And for once, we'd won. But the celebration didn't last long. Marcus pulled me aside, concern etched across his face. "General, we've got a problem." A black sedan was tailing the FBI after they left Donna's house. "Same car has been parked near your cabin for 3 hours. Plates come back to a shell company doesn't exist. Whoever's in it doesn't want this investigation to succeed." The question gnawed at me. Who was sitting in that black sedan, watching us, waiting? When the answer came, it stunned everyone, including me. The driver was Ryan Blackwood, Donna's son, 35 years old, an FBI agent with the Financial Crimes Division in Seattle. But this wasn't some family rescue mission. The next morning, Agent Williams brought Ryan to my cabin. The truth he carried with him was heavier than anything I had faced in combat. Ryan had been undercover for 8 months, building a case against his own mother. Every conversation, every family dinner, every hug had been part of the act. The toll it had taken was written all over his face, but his resolve was clear. Justice came first. "General Thornfield," Ryan said, sitting at my kitchen table, his hands trembling slightly as he opened a briefcase, "what you found here in Cedar Falls is just a fragment of a much larger machine." Inside his files was proof. Donna's network wasn't just about lining pockets, it was about reshaping communities. They'd profiled military families down to the finest detail: PTSD vulnerabilities, deployment-related financial strain, the isolation of military spouses. It was chilling. The most disturbing revelation was Donna's organization specifically hunted families of fallen or wounded soldiers. They studied casualty lists. They targeted widows, disabled veterans, anyone too broken or distracted by grief to fight back. Ryan's voice cracked as he explained how his mother had weaponized tragedy, using the deaths of soldiers to find their families and strip them of their homes. That's when David walked in. He froze as he listened, processing the bitter irony. While he and I had been trying to rebuild our relationship, another family was being torn apart by greed, betrayal, and corruption. The contrast couldn't have been sharper. The contrast between my son and me finding a way to heal, and the Blackwood family collapsing under the weight of betrayal, struck David deeply. I could see in his eyes that he finally grasped why values like honor and duty are more than just military ideals. They're the backbone that holds families and communities together. Ryan's investigation revealed the true depth of his mother's operation. It wasn't only about property theft. The money was funneled through fake construction firms, bogus renovation projects, and a maze of shell companies designed to conceal the profits. Over 8 years, nearly $900,000 in homes had been stolen from 89 families. And when the ripple effects of emotional trauma, relocation costs, and endless legal battles were factored in, the damage was immeasurable. The most difficult part of Ryan's testimony was hearing how he endured the role of dutiful son while documenting his mother's crimes. "There were nights," he admitted quietly, staring at the table, "that I'd watch her threaten a widow or an elderly couple, then go home and pretend I admired her leadership, Do you know what it's like to investigate your own mother while she believes you're her biggest supporter? Agent Williams explained that Ryan's undercover role had been the only way to map the network, but it came at a terrible personal cost. He wore recording devices to family dinners, collected evidence during casual conversations, and lived with the guilt that each day he stayed undercover, more families were harmed. I told David that Ryan's choice carried a lesson about true service. Sometimes defending your community means sacrificing your own peace, even your family ties. Courage isn't just about facing bullets, it's about choosing what's right when it costs you everything. Ryan chose justice over loyalty, and that choice saved countless families. The confrontation between mother and son unfolded at the courthouse. Donna, clinging to denial, tried one last time to twist reality. Ryan, you know I was only protecting our neighborhood. Property values were falling, and families were suffering. Everything I did was for the greater good. Ryan's voice, though calm, cut through her defense like steel. Mom, you stole homes from widows. You harassed elderly residents. You preyed on families while their loved ones were deployed serving this country. There's no a greater good that excuses what you've done. The shock on Donna's face when she realized her own son had built the case against her is something I'll never forget. The charges were sweeping: a wire fraud, racketeering, money laundering, and even violations of the Service Members Civil Relief Act. But beyond the courtroom, her arrest dismantled the empire she had built over 8 years. A dozen Ho presidents were arrested, 6 local officials indicted, and property buyers who helped launder money now faced federal prosecution. David and I left the courthouse in silence, both trying to process what we had seen. Eventually, he asked the question lingering in both our minds. Dad, how do you rebuild a family after something like this? You start by owning the damage, I told him. Then you commit to doing better, every single day, for as long as it takes. He nodded, and for the first time since my return, I felt like the bond between us was being rebuilt. But waiting at my cabin was Ryan, standing beside his car with a sealed envelope marked for after the trial. He handed it to me with an unreadable expression. General, there's something more you need to know about why my mother targeted your family, but it has to wait until after sentencing. 6 weeks later, after Donna received a 4-year prison term and was ordered to repay $890,000, I finally opened the envelope. What I found inside shattered everything I thought I knew. Inside were adoption records from 1968, proving Donna was my half-sister born from an affair, then given up for adoption when her mother was left unsupported. The truth explained everything: Donna's obsession with my property, her hatred of military families, and the twisted personal vendetta she had carried for decades. While I rose through the ranks, building a career and a reputation, she grew up believing she'd been abandoned, cheated of the life she deserved. Ryan had discovered this during his investigation but kept it hidden until the trial was over, sparing both families from even deeper pain. When Agent Williams came to discuss the revelation, her words brought a kind of closure I hadn't expected. General, this explains why your family was targeted so relentlessly. To Donna, this wasn't about profit, it was about settling a family score she'd carried for over 40 years. For nearly 50 years, Donna carried a resentment that drove everything she did. The FBI's psychological profile concluded that much of her criminal enterprise was fueled by a need to prove she was smarter and more successful than the half-brother who'd inherited the opportunities she believed had been denied to her. Since her arrest, the transformation in the community has been remarkable. Grace was unanimously elected as the new Ho president, and her first act was to establish full financial transparency and create a victim support fund using assets seized from the network. 12 families had their homes restored, while 37 others received compensation for harassment, coerced sales, and years of mistreatment. The 2 acres I donated for a veterans memorial garden became the centerpiece of the healing process. David and I worked side by side designing the space, and seeing him use his professional skills to build something meaningful for military families has brought us closer than I thought possible. Every weekend, he makes the trip from Seattle with his child Rena, my grandchildren who hardly knew me before Althiza, and together we help maintain the garden, share meals at Grace's community dinners, and rebuild the bonds we nearly lost. The investigation also expanded beyond our town. Federal authorities uncovered fraud in 6 Ho communities across 3 counties, resulting in 23 arrests and the recovery of over $1.2 million in stolen property. But the true victory wasn't in the numbers, it was in the freedom of 89 families who no longer had to live in fear. Children could once again play in their yards without threats of violations. Military spouses no longer fought battles at home while their partners served abroad. Seniors could finally remain in their homes without intimidation from predatory buyers. Marcus was recognized by the state attorney general for his pivotal role in exposing the network, earning a promotion to detective with a focus on financial crime. More importantly, he became part of our circle, joining weekend workdays at the cabin and helping organize monthly veteran gatherings. What began as 6 people meeting quietly has now grown to more than 40 veterans and their families from across the region. Ryan's journey has been more difficult. The FBI has recommended him for promotion because of the extraordinary courage it took to investigate his own mother, but the personal cost is heavy. Healing will take years. Still, I've seen him visit the memorial garden alone, and I believe he finds comfort in knowing his sacrifice protected military families who had been systematically targeted. The most powerful moment came during our first Memorial Day ceremony in the new garden. More than 150 veterans and their families came together not just to honor service and sacrifice, but to celebrate the fact that their community was finally safe. David gave a speech on protecting those who serve, and hearing him embrace the values I had spent decades trying to pass on meant more to me than any military medal. That day took an unexpected turn when I received a hand-delivered letter from the state attorney general's office. The message was both sobering and gratifying. Our case had inspired the formation of a statewide task force to investigate Ho fraud across Washington. They wanted me to serve as a consultant, helping uncover networks that prey on military families. The request also meant relocating to Olympia, leaving behind the cabin and the community I had poured myself into. Sitting on the memorial garden bench, I read the letter aloud to David. His reaction surprised me. "Dad, you need to do this. What you started here could protect families all across the state." Then he added words that made me realize how far we'd come. "And I want to help. I've been talking to my firm about taking on more pro bono work for veterans. Maybe it's time I use my law degree for something that actually matters." As the sun set, I looked around at the families laughing, children playing freely, and veterans sharing stories without fear. This was the real face of justice. Not just punishment for criminals, but restoration for the people they hurt. And yet, the words in that attorney general's letter made me turn to my son and say, "David, it's time to pack up the cabin again." So here's the takeaway from this entire ordeal. Never wield false authority against others just because their success unsettles you, because eventually, the truth comes out, and those lies will be exposed and you'll be held accountable for every bit of damage you caused. Karen discovered that the hard way when she learned that calling 911 on luxury cars isn't so clever, especially when the car owner is the very person who answers those calls. If this story of justice served cold resonated with you, hit that like button to let me know. Thanks for watching Ya Story Essa, and I'll see you in the next episode, where karma finds its next target.